Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. Today, I'm here to propose the idea that teenagers in the United States should not be allowed to legally leave home at the age of 18 until they're at least 23 years old, unless there's a legit reason or reasonable cause for them to leave at such a young age as 18. For example, if they're going to college, joining the military, joining Job Corps, or if they're at risk of any sort while living with their parents or guardians. Ladies and gentlemen, this is because the teen years is a very exciting period, but also a very crucial and risky one because there's a lot of growth and changes occurring, social, physical changes, psychological changes, and emotional changes that really requires the attention and supervision of an adult or someone who has more experience. And because usually many adults have more life experiences than teenagers, it is crucial that teens remain under the guidance of somebody of that sort because they have the tools and are well equipped and are able to teach the younger ones how to prepare for life and how to prepare to become adults or prepare for adulthood. And so we have adults in our life. If it's not your parents, it could be a coach, a pastor, whatever. We have grown-ups in our life who are there to teach us life lessons and what life is all about so that we don't approach life in blindfolds, but instead approach it with some skills that we've learned and what we've been able to acquire from being under the supervision of a grown-up. And so to begin, who are teenagers anyway? Are they children or adults? How do we know when a person has reached adulthood? Is adulthood defined by age, experience, marriage, parenthood, maturity, or all the above? Why are teenagers at 18 given the right to consider themselves legal adults, but not permitted to drink until they're 21? And what does that say about the way we view teenagers? Are teenagers misled by some of their own legal rights? As a parent, how does it feel to be threatened by your child with the notion of leaving home at 18? Knowing that they're not prepared yet and that their lack of experience, training, and preparation for the real world could lead to dire consequences. I want you to keep these questions in mind as we progress. Now, in order for me to make my argument, I must begin with the basics first, and that is defining who teenagers are and understanding their legal rights in society. The word adolescence derived from the Latin word adolescere, which means to grow up. It's often used to describe the teenage years from ages 12 to 18. It is defined as the transitional period in human growth and development that occurs from puberty to legal adulthood. Many aspects of growth and development seen during the adolescent period are driven by biological processes, which are simply vital functions that keep an organism alive. The elements that determine the nature of adolescence are universal, with the onset of puberty marking the transition from childhood to adolescence. Now, although the biological determinants of adolescence are universal, the duration and defining characteristics of this period such as the physical, psychological, and cultural expression, varies across time, cultures, and socioeconomic situations. So for example, puberty historically had been associated with the onset of adolescence. We now know that it begins prior to that stage, occurring in pre-adolescence, particularly in females. Therefore, adolescence is a term that has more to do with the way society deals with its young people than an individual's biophysical structure. Let's take a look at some of the legal rights teenagers have. I assume many of you are familiar with the term age of majority. For those of you who aren't, the age of majority is defined as the chronological age which minors are granted adult status by law. These include the age of sexual consent, the marriageable age, the drinking age, the driving age, and the voting age, all of which vary from state to state and are independent of and sometimes set at a different age from the age of majority. So what that means is that a person can attain the age of majority in certain jurisdictions. However, they may be subject to age-based restrictions regarding other matters, such as the right to stand for elective office or act as a judge. The age of majority should not be confused with the age of license, which is the age at which one has legal permission from the government to do something. And what this means is that an individual can still be recognized as an adult at 18 years old, but they are not legally permitted to do certain things, like consume alcohol, for example, until they're 21 years old. Although the ages of license correlate to the age of majority, both are still considered two legally distinct concepts. In general, the law says that at 14, a child can consent to their own medical treatment. At 15, they can be employed, choose to leave school, or enter into a civil law marriage with the consent of the parents or guardian. At 17, they can operate a vehicle and motorcycle if they have full license and proper insurance. At 18, they can register as a voter, consent to sex, be considered the head of a household, and bear rights and responsibilities as a caregiver. They can vote in local and general elections, serve on a jury, get married without parental permission, buy and sell cigarettes or any other tobacco product, stand for election as a local councilor or mayor, and the list goes on. But what if the age at which our society defines adulthood is wrong? Are we really done developing physically, especially psychologically, at the age of 18? Neuroscience has made massive advances over the years in the study of the human brain. With the development of new brain scanning technology and brain imaging techniques, scientists have been able to prove that the brain is constantly changing from the time we are little to about our mid-20s. They've also been able to track how the brain changes into adulthood and process information. In 2011, Christian Bulow, a health solutions scientist, and his PhD student, Catherine Libel, conducted medical research at the University of Alberta that proved that the teen years are a time of significant change in the activity, anatomy, and neurochemistry of the brain. The study specifically demonstrated that parts of the brain continue to develop post-adolescence well into the mid-20s. This research was the first long-range study using a type of imaging that looked at brain wiring to show that in the white matter, which we'll discuss later, there were still structural changes happening during young adulthood, and that the brain was also continuing to develop wiring to the prefrontal cortex as well during this stage. For the research, the duo used magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, to scan the brains of 103 healthy people between the ages of 5 and 32. Each study subject was scanned at least twice, with a total of 202 scans being conducted overall. Changes in the teenage brain also mean changes in their behavior and that they act differently when they're kids than they do when they're adults, when they become adults. In 2012, Sarah Jane Blakemore, a cognitive neuroscientist who studies the network of brain regions involved in understanding other people and how it develops in adolescence, gave a TED Talk on why, quote, teenagers seem to be much more impulsive and so much less self-aware than grown-ups, unquote, by comparing the prefrontal cortex in adolescence to that of adults to show how typical teenage behavior is caused by their growing and developing brain. Functional MRI studies done with children, adolescents, and adults have shown that adolescents' brains function differently from adults than adults do, especially when it comes to decision making and problem solving, because their actions are guarded more by the amygdala, which is the part of the brain responsible for instinctual reactions, and less by the prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain involved in critical thinking and decision making. This causes their brains to exhibit a set of, quote, consistently identifiable tendencies as they relate to the maturity of judgment. There are three in particular worth highlighting, and they are increased novelty seeking, increased risk taking, and increased desire to affiliate and interact with peers. Based on the stage in their brain development, adolescents are more likely to act on impulse, mislead, misread, or misinterpret social cues and emotions. They're less likely to think before they act, pause to consider the potential consequences of their actions, and modify their dangerous or inappropriate behaviors. They're easily influenced by peer pressure and likely to become depressed and engage in dangerous and risky behaviors such as having unprotected sex. This is because most of the time they are more accepting of consequences that are unknown, not because they're actually drawn towards risky situations. This is according to findings by Yale School of Medicine research that was done and published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Science. In 2011, a study showed that researchers from the University of Pittsburgh discovered through tests on rats new insight into neuron activity in adolescents' brains, which helped explain why teens considered rewards over consequences. For the study, the experts analyzed a group of teens as well as a group of middle-aged adults by asking them to make decisions involving unknown and known risks. The 65 participants involved in the study were aged between 12 and 50 years old. The researchers asked the volunteers to make decisions involving money and the lottery. The extent of risk was different for each question. During some of the experiments, the people were told the precise probabilities of being able to win the lottery, and in others, they were not told the chances, therefore making the risk level uncertain and high. Researchers discovered that when the teens were told about the exact risk of the decisions they were making, they tried to avoid them equally as much as the adults did, or even more. On the other hand, the adolescents were much more comfortable with uncertain situations and unknown risks than the adults were. So let's talk about the way the brain matures, a concept called neural maturation. According to Dr. Robert J. Hediya, a clinical professor of psychiatry at the Georgetown University Hospital and founder of the National Center for Whole Psychiatry, the overall structure of the brain is like an ice cream cone with two scoops. The cone represents the brain stem, which controls basic functions such as alertness, breathing, blood pressure, and body temperature. Now, the brain itself is made up of two parts called the white matter and the gray matter. The gray matter, which is represented by the two scoops of ice cream, stores all the brain's information. Now, the gray matter also is then divided into two regions. The first region, which is represented by the first scoop of ice cream, sitting on top of the cone, is called the limbic system, also known as the emotional brain. And it is involved in hormonal control, memory, automatic, and unconscious emotional reactions of the brain. Now, the second region, which is represented by the second scoop of ice cream, is called the prefrontal cortex, and it is involved in critical thinking and decision making. It is also the key area that has the most interesting changes in adolescence. Yeah, so that's the first part of the brain. The second part of the brain, which is the white matter, forms all the connections between the different parts of the brain. If you examine the human brain at a microscopic level, you will see that there are millions of nerve cells all connected together that converge at certain points. These points of convergence are called nuclei. One of the major nuclei in the brain is called the amygdala. It is a region of the brain that develops early, and it is responsible for instinctual reactions including rage, fear, aggressive behavior, and sex. At age 11 for girls and 12 for boys, our gray matter sort of peaks, matures. But our white matter doesn't completely develop until we're in our mid-20s. So what this means is that the brain of a teenager literally isn't physically fully connected yet during the stage of adolescence. And as a result, Their brain's ability to process information in a way that, quote, looks at the entire picture is impacted, unquote. From the time our gray matter peaks onward, rarely used connections get selectively pruned away, a process that makes the brain increasingly integrated and efficient. The surviving neural connections become better at transmitting information through myelination, a process that provides insulation for neural connections, allowing nerve impulses to travel around the brain more quickly and efficiently. It has also been found that the last part of the brain to finish developing its connections during the increasing connectivity of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex, when fully developed, is in a constant dialogue with the limbic brain, the emotional brain, and both remain in balance, each one inhibiting the other. This entire process that's just been described to you improves the brain's ability to efficiently transfer information between regions. This is considered the period when we get increasingly, quote, better at executing functions that are characterized with maturity, things like impulse control, attention, and motivation, and become more like intelligent, responsible adults, unquote. So now, ladies and gentlemen, we know that adolescence is a time of dramatic structural and functional neurodevelopment, and that the human brain does not stop developing until around the mid-20s because many of the nerve cells responsible for the different parts of the brain to work together are not fully connected yet. We understand why teenagers are so eager to leave home around 18, and hopefully now realize the high risk in giving them adult status and privileges at such a young age. You see, with all the changes occurring in a teenage brain, as well as in their social and academic world, teenagers quickly develop a deep need to define themselves, to clarify who they are and what they stand for. As they are losing their pre-adolescent identity, they're desperate for a new identity. This search can have constructive or destructive aspects to it. The constructive aspect is that it can help encourage learning and exploration of new experiences. Because teenagers don't know clearly what they want or what they can do, they try to experiment with many different things. This helps them discover what works for them, what feels right, and who they're becoming. Now, the negative aspect of this search, however, is that it could lead to problems if not done properly or in a safe and healthy manner. Often, a teenager's new identity is supplied by their peer group, for better or for worse. Exposure to certain things can be bad for them as well due to the, quote, physical brain chemistry that's going on in their brain, which makes them likely to become addicted to things much more quickly, such as illicit drugs and alcohol. And those addictions can hold on through adulthood, unquote. Therefore, one of the most important things to remember is that what a teen does and is exposed to during their crucial time of development in life has a large influence on their future. Overall, the changes in a teenager's brain doesn't mean that young people can't make good decisions or tell the difference between right and wrong. Because with the advancements in technology, Teenagers today are very advanced from an intellectual perspective. Everything is coming at them sooner, and they're consuming it. The point that I'm trying to make, ladies and gentlemen, is that teenagers, although very smart beings, are still emotionally behind and seem to require more time to actually grow up and prepare for the responsibilities that comes with adulthood. Therefore, it is crucial that they remain at home and under the authority and guidance of their parents or legal guardian. Because, like I mentioned earlier, parents have a unique opportunity to influence their teen during the critical period of adolescence. They play a key role in their development and well-being and help foster them safely into adulthood because they are more knowledgeable and more experienced. See, our society teaches us that the rite of passage for adulthood is leaving home. But I'm saying that adulthood begins at home, and that adolescents do not have to move out of the parental house in order to be considered adults or independent. In general, you see, home is where we learn the basic skills about life from our parents and just about life in general. It is where we learn the skills needed to carry out adult relationships and roles, manage our behavior and emotions, practice safe exploration and responsibility, develop our identity in a safe and healthy manner, and develop the capacity for abstract reasoning. At 18, ladies and gentlemen, a teenager may look and act like an adult, but they really aren't quite equipped or prepared to be that. And so that is why they should not be allowed to leave home legally at that age until they're at least 23 years old, because by then, at least they're a little bit more equipped and more experienced and more knowledgeable and are a bit older. And so they've gone through their stage of development and now they're slowly getting past that adolescent stage. And that's a safe age to release them out into the world and let them start experiencing life on their own. And hopefully they can take all the stuff that they've learned from home and apply it into life, into their own life as they begin life independently on their own. I would encourage those of you who are parents with teenagers to take this into consideration and stand with me as we protest against lawmakers. And let's encourage our kids to enjoy their adolescent years. There's a time for everything. There's a time to be a child, and there's a time to be a teenager, and there's a time to be an adult. And let's stop rushing our teens into adulthood and stop, especially the media. Teens are very much influenced by the media because our society is just filled with these messages that encourage teens to be independent and move out and do this and do that. And they're not really teaching our kids that independence and all that stuff begins at home. And so parents, please join with me. And like I said, let's encourage our teenagers to remain teenagers and enjoy their adolescence years and take that time to learn about what it means to become an adult and how do you enter into adulthood. Because teenagers at 18 are not ready to be adults quite yet. They're still children. They're at a crucial time in their life, a very confusing time. And so let's allow them to go through those changes, but also allow them to be who they are. And that is simply teenagers. Thank you.